Hey everybody, this is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. This week, coming to us from Marin County, California, is Greg Wilker. He lives there where he does his best to remain present for his 3 children. He is a producer and host of 2 podcasts, one of them with his friend Mark, and he's slowly working on a 3rd. He's also renewing efforts to create a career as an entertainer and performer. And as he said in his own writing, one day he will die. As of his writing, he doesn't know when that day is. I was on Greg's podcast with Mark, and I had such a great time, and I cannot wait to interview him today. So with no further delays, Greg, how's it going?
It is going well.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of everything, I always have my guests give their age, where they grew up, and what generation, if any, they think they belong to.
All right, I'm 61. I grew up primarily in California, Southern California till the middle of 8th grade, and then Northern California since then. And what generation do I belong to? My generation.
Awesome. So the Who sums you up.
Yeah.
And you've had a pretty interesting career. I mean, I lurked and snooped around on your life on the internet, and it's awesome. For a good example of what I'm talking about, we were supposed to record this 2 weeks ago, and then you got a gig on a film, and you said, hey, can we delay it by a week or two? And I was happy to do so, but how much of different media forms have you done in your career? I think you also did comedy, right?
Yeah, I've done stand-up comedy, I've done acting, I've done producing, and kind of my bread and butter are websites and video editing, primarily for online formats. I'm a dad. I'm an ex-husband. I don't know. I'm a madman in many ways. I think in a way, though, a creative is a mad person to a degree.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I've done a lot of things, have a lot of stories to tell, but no real lucrative career to show for it all.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm 42, and I thought I would have something by now that you're speaking about. And now as I get older and meet more people like you and other awesome, interesting people, I realize that what actually matters is having fun as you go. Like, I've met people who do have the thing we're talking about, and they are like the antithesis of happy. I'm sure you've worked with them, especially in stand-up comedy.
Well, yeah, but to that, there's also people who have it and are very happy.
Yeah.
So I think it's a worthy pursuit until we die. And as I do understand, the cornerstone of your podcast is the other side of things.
Yeah, and actually working towards that, and in the same conversation about what we're talking about, do you think it matters what age you, quote, get it at? Like, so let's assume that we all get this thing we want that is like our legacy. Do you care if it came when you were in your 20s, 40s, if it came now in your 60s, or even later?
I really don't think it matters at all. And the reason I don't is I think it doesn't matter at all. I think we're infinite beings, and the elements of this planet are finite. And in the big picture of things, anything finite really doesn't matter.
I am so with you. And it's funny because it's weird how much that resonates with me. But 5 years ago, I would have started arguing with you. Not about, yeah, not that we're infinite beings. That part I would have been cool with. But I would have said, no, this has to matter. But now I'm like, oh, it clearly doesn't matter. Like, it's so obvious to me in transcendental moments of my life that it just really doesn't matter. And also as we see, like, you know, because you and I are like, a long time ago, kids listening at home, in the 80s, you didn't hear about every celebrity's death. You heard about some, but it wasn't like this thing where people like couldn't wait to like talk about a famous person dying. And then we also had the proliferation of fame, like more and more famous people than ever in our culture, our American culture / world culture exist. And so it's interesting to me because that seems to add to the canon of this does matter, but actually the more I notice it happening, the more I'm like, oh, I forgot about that person. They were relevant for like a hot minute in my life, and then they weren't. And so what really matters to them is what you've talked about in your bio, which is your 3 children, like your relationships with other people. So I don't know if you agree or disagree, but does that resonate at all with you?
It does. I would say probably the semantics of what we're both talking about and even thought about years ago. The moment does matter, and it's our happiness that's important to every moment. So if we have a moment where we're starring in something that we've always dreamed about, regardless of what it is, a chef, a lawyer, an actor, whatever, that starring moment is a peak moment. And in that moment, it matters. What also matters is sort of the takeaway of individuals, like in my peak moment, I'm yelling and screaming like a diva at everyone. Well, the moments that are following that peak moment are going to be horrendous. And that moment was horrendous for a lot of people. So part of my wish, I suppose, my goal, sort of my own cornerstone of life, is that we're experiencing happy moments and as many people as possible are happy in those moments.
Wow, that's really, really profound and well said. And it's funny because as you were talking about these moments, I was thinking about how, like, before I had children, and I have 2 and a third on the way, I was told, like, the moment that you first hold them is, like, the life-changing, and that wasn't true for both. What it was, it applied to, everything they said applied, but it applied to a different moment, which is the first time they held my hand. The first time I felt them squeeze me with that, like, I mean, even talking about it right now, I'm getting goosebumps. So it's interesting because, like, I honestly think, like, right now, I would say those are, like, 2 of my peak moments. I have this, like, vivid memory of my son Tyler the first time he held my hand, and Alice too, and it's crazy. And speaking of children, I mean, you don't have to, like, out them and, like, who they are and all that, but, like, how is child rearing for you as far as, like, life accomplishments? I mean, because you mentioned it first in your bio, I'm assuming it's pretty important, right?
It's an absolute important part of my life to be a dad for these 3 individuals throughout their life. I mean, throughout my life, throughout, however, yes. And I would say that to sum up my ideas of fatherhood, it's to be present. So whenever I'm called upon, I'm there for them to support them on their personal journey. So I do my best to really let them live their life. And I think the one positive, not one, there's probably a couple, but one positive is with their mom, who, as I mentioned, is my ex. We both were on the same page with these are individuals and they have rights from moment one and should be treated as such. So the whole thing of hierarchy in life, I think, crazy. That's crazy. And the hard part, I think, as a parent, is that means they're going to take their knocks, and we don't want our children to be happy and challenged and all that stuff. But that's part of their journey, just as it was for us. So we need to allow for them to suffer as much as we want them to be happy.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I was going to go off on a different tangent, but I'm actually going to redirect my own mind to the subject of divorce, because I think I think 2 things in American culture we don't talk enough about are death and, oddly enough, divorce. And I don't mean that, like, you hear the word divorce a lot and you hear, like, 50% of blah, blah, blah. But what I don't think people realize is sometimes it's necessary and sometimes it's not. But, like, it should be discussed more, especially, like, I think before you get married. I think there should be more. I know Catholics have, like, an actual course on marriage. And I think in general it should just be, like, something you're required to do before the state certifies you for something like that. But with that in mind, with your children, I'm just curious. Like, I felt a lot of guilt, even though I knew it was correct for us to get divorced with our kid. I still feel like guilt to this day that, like, they now are the kid of a divorced home, whereas I wasn't. And I'm just curious, does that ever play into your psyche?
It does, but I would say that more and more I'm realizing that I worried about it more than them. And that they all 3 say that in light of other, their peers, as they hear other stories of families that divorce, that they're grateful for the way ours was, the way their mom and I interacted at the beginning and kind of held space for a family in the first few years of divorcing. And lastly, I would say that probably most of the pain in the divorce is my own thoughts of family, wanting to have that loving partnership, romantic partnership, that in that are two people raising a family together. And I think I even put a lot of my personal ideals of spirituality into that marriage. And so when it's ended, kind of poetically saying it was a crucifixion in my life. And so, yeah, I think right now as I talk with you, I believe I'm the one who's made more of it than the three kids.
That makes so much sense, and I can totally identify with that. And then, like, along similar lines, have you ever helped someone go through a divorce?
No, I can't say that I have. No one's coming to mind.
It's interesting because I've done it twice now, and it felt quote unquote good, only because someone helped me go through mine. And so, like, I feel like there's just this, like, interesting thing in and it's funny because I usually this podcast is pretty open to, like, all cultures, but I think this subject is pretty darn, like, Western Civ 101. But there's like a stigma people are afraid of, not the thing you just talked about, which is the personal actual pain you're going to go through, but, like, the rest of your life telling people you're divorced, or, like, it comes up and you watch their face sour and, like, all that. I don't know.
Well, what's interesting, like what you're talking about culturally, like, I'm still not clear how to fill out a form where it's talking about relationship status and they're single and divorced. And I'm like, well, I'm divorced, but I'm single. Like, I don't know. How long do we carry that Scarlet D on our, on our chest?
Oh, man, that's a good episode title, The Scarlet D. Okay, I'm totally shifting the car and going into a different gear here, but I have to give you credit because when I was on your podcast, I mentioned, or you mentioned, or Mark, I don't even remember who brought it up, but the book, The Course in Miracles, and special shout out to Courtney and Danny. They were the first two people to introduce me to the book, and then I bought it on their recommendation, and then it was sitting, just, like, staring at me for months, and then you gave me, like, the nudge to start it. So I'm now on day 45, I think, of it, and before I talk about my experience with it, what are your thoughts about the Course in Miracles, and can you kind of give, like, a brief description to our audience?
The Course in Miracles is a course with a very thick workbook, like text. There's a very thick text. Along with it is a workbook of daily exercises that last a year. And then there's a teacher's manual. It is a text that was, if we believe the people involved, was kind of transmuted through the Holy Spirit to this woman, like automatic writing. And both her and the person who supported her in this were both psychologists. And from what I hear, they were fighting with each other like cats and dogs. And just both of them one day were like, there's got to be a better way to life than this. And then this text started coming through. So there's a lot of psychology to it, I believe, that the text itself seems to resonate with people who have that kind of train of thought. And lastly, I'd say it ultimately is a guide to everlasting peace and happiness. The one sentence I love from it that sums it up is, and I'm going to paraphrase probably, but everything real is from God, and everything unreal can't be attacked. Therein lies the peace of God.
That's really well paraphrased. I don't even know if it's the accurate quote or not, but that is 100%. Yeah, like I said, I'm in, like, day 40 something, so I'm in the second month of it. But the peak moments so far have been when that exact profound statement you said not only resonates, but rattles the rest of the day in my head.
It absolutely is a great tool for learning about how we are our perspective and how we are the masters of our perspective, in the sense that our perspective is our choice. And well, once you kind of get that, then I guess the rest of life is practicing it.
That was sort of where I was going with it. So I'm going to ask you a really absurd, but to me relevant question. While I do intuitively grok and accept the very statement you made that the only real thing is God, what I have issues with is like literally right now, it's August 15th as we record this. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. We have not seen rain more than like 3 times this year. Every single year I've been alive, I was born in 1981. Every single year there have been, quote, more record storms and more record weather. And I feel like I'm just going effing insane because it's like forbidden for us collectively to just admit that like this doesn't feel right, this doesn't seem right, and even if it's not at all man-made, it doesn't seem like anyone really wants to do anything about it. And so I'm having a lot of trouble as I read this book, literally focusing on those thoughts. Like it seems easier for me to do it with my personal relationships, like to forgive my ex for things that I, think she quote unquote did to me, and stuff like that. But like this one thing, this like egregious environmental problem I've had since I was a little child is hard for me. So I was wondering if you could like address that and or coach me through that.
Well, I would say that the footnote to whatever I say is there's a human being talking,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe that part of our human existence is a finite existence, so it's flawed. Like I do believe it. A lot of people get caught up in the word God, and it's triggering in many ways. And I'd say an equal word to use is love. So without going on a tangent in that realm, as we agreed to earlier, our Earth is finite. The physical universe is finite. And therefore, I would say from the defining from Course in Miracles, it isn't God's creation. Or the elements we resonate with that are finite are not God's creation. Perhaps nature itself as a force is eternal, and this is a byproduct of nature. You're speaking like you're in Arizona, it's 105 degrees, there's no rain, it's miserable if you walk outside at 9:30 in the morning. But that statement right there, it's miserable, is the perspective.
Aha.
And so are you willing to walk out into the dry heat of a hot, hot day and be happy?
That's fascinating. That actually helps. It probably doesn't sound helpful to a lot of people listening, but it actually really helps. This is part of why I wanted to have you on, Greg, by the way, just to give you a huge compliment. You're very interesting. You're very intelligent. You're very adaptive to both like spirituality and just like and giggles, ha ha ha, fun time. And so I liked all that. But when you really blew me away was when we started talking about metaphysical stuff. And so it just really impressed me because first of all, I also have a stereotype growing up in the Bay Area, which is that there's a lot of fake nice people there, and there's very few genuinely nice people there per capita compared to other cities I've lived in. So it's not that there's very few nice people there. It's that people say, like, if you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear flowers in your hair. And I'd say be sure to, like, pack protective gear for homeless defecation and random assaults from people who are angry, not at you, but at, like, some cause. And, again, lived there for 30-something years, so people can write hate mail to me if they want. But you're, like, an exception to my stereotype rule, and you're, like, one of the good ones. But I don't just like spiritual people who are, like, mellow and, like, calm and all that because they're not entertaining. So when did you become this like spiritual / like humor entertainment hero?
Wow, you granted me that merit badge. I don't feel like I am a hero in this. I feel like a rank amateur, and maybe that's a Zen blessing to my attitude of life that I'm always in a beginner's mind. And I would say, I don't know, I've had some experiences in my life that were profound for me personally. 18, I was with friends that we all wanted to be rock stars, and we were forming a band. And giving you the Reader's Digest version, one day I'm listening to Sympathy for the Devil out in the deck. I'm by myself. And I was like, all right, yeah, if that's what it takes to be a rock star, I'll sell my soul to the devil. And that kind of, to me, in my experience, was the beginning of a path that went dark, really dark. I would say I was crazy for a period of time. It had the stereotypical arc of the deal with the devil where everything's going great, you're getting all your wishes, and all of a sudden it goes wrong. And then before that, I've had experiences like when I was 11 or 12 where there was a friend over and there was this community carnival that took place. That was a church thing, and he and his family were going to go with my family, and I'd never met him before, but he said he has ESP, and I was like, oh, really? How do you do that? And he taught me that morning.
Wow.
And we had this experience of like looking into the future and also having this kind of crazy dark thing about the house. It was a 2-story house. It had elements of being not quite Victorian, but it made a great haunted house on Halloween. Like you could, it had structure and architecture that just lent itself to that. And so that was an experience that has stuck with me. And the last sort of signpost for me were like, okay, God is real. And I say that, so like I'm still an individual who's trying to figure it all out. Like, is God real? Well, what is God? And how do I fit in this whole thing? But when my father passed away, he was Jewish, and he wanted a traditional Jewish burial. And the body can't be left alone until it's buried in the ground. And we needed 3 days for his brothers to come from the East Coast. So I stayed at the mortuary where his body was for 3 days. And on the first night, they're closing up. There's someone in the office, so it's all closed down. And I'm walking around, and all of a sudden I felt weightless. And I was like, whoa, this is weird. Like, literally felt like I was floating. And I'm sort of floating along in this one direction. And you know how when a rug is laid down, like there's sort of a direction it's laid in, and then there's a seam if the rug changes, when you're laying carpet down.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
So I hit that seam where it was going to this hallway to this other section, and all of a sudden I'm dropped on the ground, landed back on the ground. I was like, wow. I don't think I was literally floating. It just felt that way. I'm like, that was weird. And I turn around, all of a sudden I'm floating again. I'm like, okay, this is whack. And I'm going along, and I get to this place where they have these signs pointing to where the individuals are resting so families can come and know what direction to go see their loved one. And I kind of stops there, and I'm like, okay, and I slowly am turned. That's the experience I had. I'm turned, I'm looking at these signs, and my dad's last name is misspelled. And I laughed. I went, all right, I'll take care of it. And it went away.
Whoa.
And I went to the office and, said, hey, you misspelled my dad's last name. I said, all right, and I corrected it. And so that is an experience that I have that has given me, so those 3 that I mentioned are all experiences profound enough to stay with me strongly and sort of be guideposts of, well, there is something more than this physical realm that we live with our 5 senses. And so that's a very long-winded way to say I am imagining, my hypothesis is that these experiences have lent themselves to my being open to there's more to life than the physical realm, but I don't feel I'm a master in any way.
That's so interesting. That was great, by the way. Thank you. Really interesting. And I think it segues perfectly to the question we always ask every guest, which is, so what exactly do you think is going to happen to you when you die?
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
It's kind of just waking up to a different realm. It's like, we go to sleep and we all have sleep experiences, and we wake up to sort of this different reality than the sleeping reality. And sometimes the line's blurred where you have a dream and you kind of wake up and you're still in that dream, and then slowly you get back into this realm of planet Earth. I think it's going to be like that. Like, I'll just be like, I'll wake up, and what I'm concentrating more on is to let go of this realm and this body as peacefully and joyfully as possible when the time comes. Because I've seen people fight it, and that's very difficult.
Yeah, I totally agree. I did hospice volunteering for a couple of years, and that was the biggest takeaway by far. The second takeaway was why I have the show, which is, man, there's a lot of people out there who refuse to talk about death, and they're the exact kind of people who should be talking about it. Meanwhile, people like you and I'm not even sure if we need to be talking about it more, but it's certainly fun. Who is the you that survives this? Is it Greg, or is it a different thing?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer. Again, kind of going back to the hypothesis element. Greg was a name given to me when I was born to my two parents. It didn't exist to this personality before that, to my knowledge. So I think it's one of the finite elements of who I am that will fall away. But I don't know. That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, that I don't think... if I ever have a guest someday who solves it with evidence, I'll be... this podcast will have more than paid itself off. But what about, like, do you feel... Okay, this is an unfair question to ask. I'm sure you love your three children equally. There's no doubt in my mind. So with that said, in case they're listening, is there one, though, that you, like, felt familiar to differently than the other two, or maybe two and not a third? Or I'm not even asking you to exclude one. I'm just curious, like, do you ever feel familiarity that's, like, eerie or weird with people in your direct family?
No. I don't have that experience. Nothing's coming to mind, even with friends or, I'd say there's just people in my life where the experience of each other continues on, and maybe it falls away and then it comes back. There's people where, we could not talk for 20 years and then we're back together. Like, there's a friend of mine who passed away about a year ago now. And in high school, we were like brothers. We were just hanging out all the time, getting high, listening to classic rock. At the time, it was just rock. And I recently did an episode with him before he passed. And I hadn't seen him in probably 30, 40 years. And it was like sitting in his room back in high school, that ease of being. And I was just amazed by that. I was like, wow. Because I'd kind of forgotten that feeling. And there it was. I was like, I remember how easy this was back in the day.
Yeah, no, that's so special. And I asked it because I felt it in fleeting moments with different people in my life. And it's always been this thing that made me want to believe in reincarnation. But sadly, no matter how much I try, I just kind of don't feel like the way it's talked about and perceived is how it works. So reincarnation might be real and there might be this real thing going on, but I don't think there's like any, like let's pretend I was Cleopatra in a past life. It wouldn't matter. Like, that isn't relevant or important. So, so what your answer actually kind of is more along the lines of what I've sadly been facing the older I get, which is like, the magic is just the magic. Like, life is just magical. It's not, you don't have to like search deeper for it. The love you have with your children or a best friend in high school is magic. And I can really identify with that, getting back in touch with someone and how quickly it can work out. Also, I think going back to the meta subject of the first part of this podcast with divorce, that's a hard thing to face too, is that sometimes maybe your paths really are supposed to separate, even though you at one point did share a profound love and a family and all that. So we are running out of time. I always give my guests the floor at the end of the podcast to just speak about whatever they want to. It's not a time to plug your stuff. We'll have plenty of room in the notes for that. It's really just, what would you want humanity to hear?
I think we've covered a lot. I guess I just saw Patti Smith. Are you familiar with her?
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I saw her with Bodie Sunday. There was a free concert in San Francisco. And she was so passionate and raw and still had her punk energy. It was brilliant. At the very end, she just said to the whole world, really, but to the people there, be happy. And that I think is just the best statement to live by. Be happy.
I love it, and I'm going to practice tomorrow morning. I'm going to get up at 4:30 in the morning to walk my dog, and I'm going to step into the scalding, dry Arizona, weird, buggy morning. It's dark and it's hot heat, and I'm going to put a big smile on my face, and I'm going to think of you, Greg. So thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I said a few moments ago, we'll have notes for how to find him and his multiple podcasts. And if you live in the Bay Area, and Greg, if you're going to be doing stand-up, I hope people go and see you. Stand-up is my favorite form of art. And yes, it's an art, and it's the best, and I love it. So I am always rooting for anyone in that field. And for the rest of you who are listening, if you want to support the podcast and you have not already done so, please head over to mikeyop.com. That's MIKEYOPP.com, and hit the big old free subscription button so that we stay in touch. And thank you again to Greg, and thank you again to everyone who listens. My name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.
Walking along when I hear this song, and I walk into you.